Welcome inside the War Room. I'm your host, Andrew Valancourt, and we're back today for episode 24 of the Dynasty War Room podcast. On today's show, we're going to break down the NFC North. So we covered the AFC in our previous 4 shows, and now we are moving on to the NFC, starting with the NFC North. So we have some buys, sells, sleepers, and breakouts for the division as a whole, and we'll have some predictions for the division at the end of the show as well. If you've missed any of our previous shows, including those AFC divisional breakdowns, you can find them on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, pretty much anywhere that podcasts can be found. Give us a like or subscribe on whatever platform you're currently listening to, or follow, whichever one it is. Leave us a 5-star review. We appreciate that. And go give us a follow on Twitter at Dynasty War Room, and subscribe on YouTube as well to help our YouTube channel grow. Eventually, we will shift into also having videos to go with just the audio format, but not quite yet. So for now, we're just going to stick with the regular podcasts, and I don't have anything else here to promo, so let's just jump right into the NFC North. So as always, we will go in alphabetical order, and that means the Chicago Bears are up first. So it's been a pretty exciting offseason if you are a Bears fan. They had the number 1 pick in the draft, added another top 10 wide receiver in Rome Odunze, and things are looking up. Justin Fields was shipped out to Pittsburgh. So let's start with the QB position. Caleb Williams, currently being valued on Keep Trade Cut as the QB 8. Which is behind Anthony Richardson and Joe Burrow, but ahead of Jordan Love, Justin Herbert, and Kyler Murray. Now, I have him a little bit more in line with Kyler Murray. I think I'd probably have him in between Herbert and Murray, which is more like QB in the 10-11 range. So I think 8 is a little bit high for me, but I always have been a bit of a conservative ranker when it comes to rookie quarterbacks, because if I'm looking at taking a rookie QB in a startup at the 1-2 turn or late first, I think that's pretty risky. I just don't love giving up, a known asset. Like, I don't know that I could see myself moving Joe Burrow for Caleb Williams, or Jordan Love, Justin Herbert straight up for Caleb Williams. I think that I would prefer still the more proven, still elite quarterbacks. So that's kind of where I fall on, the rookie QB whole of valuing them, not evaluating them. I think from an evaluation standpoint, Caleb Williams is actually very good. He has everything you want from a rookie quarterback. He ends up in what probably is the best situation for a number 1 overall pick quarterback in recent memory. So he can run the ball. He does have that rushing upside. He's going to have great weapons, great receivers. Was obviously a stud at USC in college. So a lot to like with Caleb Williams. So when I say I would have guys like Love and Herbert ahead of him, that's not, putting Caleb Williams down in any way. It's just simply it's a little too risky for me. I tend to be a bit of a safer player, especially when you're talking early rounds, startups or making a big trade, something along those lines. But either way, future is bright in Chicago at quarterback. So next up, we'll move on to the running back position, and DeAndre Swift leads the group there. He's valued on Keep Trade Cut at RB21, and he's joined in the backfield by Roschon Johnson at RB51 and Khalil Herbert at RB60. And Swift is behind Stevenson, Derrick Henry, Zamir White, Joe Mixon, which I think he fits in that group. I think there's a pretty clear tier break right after Swift, because he's ranked ahead of Tajay Spears, David Montgomery, Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren. So I think he's pretty properly ranked, kind of right in that mix. It is interesting that Derrick Henry is valued so highly still given his age. However, I think that speaks more to how good he should be this year in redraft. So I think that that's fine for Swift. I do think that there's a split in tiers, and that he's probably the last guy in that tier of players that we just mentioned. So I think it's a fair ranking. He was a player that we talked about a few episodes ago as a potential bust candidate for this year, and we'll get into that more here with the rest of the guys in this backfield, but I have doubts. And we've never really seen him have the volume or the ability to be a true bell cow, handle a goal line workload, just be on the field all the time, which would be awesome because he's got a great skill set, very talented player. He can catch passes, but I just hesitate a little bit with him because I do like Roschon Johnson. Khalil Herbert is still talented. They're not just going to sit on the sidelines the entire game. I think this is going to end up being a little bit more of a committee where Swift will, get passing work and he'll be the leader in the backfield. There's no doubt, especially given the contract he received. But I do expect that Roschon Johnson probably will be the goal line back, and Khalil Herbert's going to get worked into the mix a bit as well. So if you're okay with knowing that he's really just a low-end RB2, then he's fine. If he's going to be someone that you plug in your flex as an RB3 to your team, something like that. If you're a contender, I would be pretty worried about having DeAndre Swift as my RB2. So RB3, RB4, that's really more of where I'd be looking to have him if I'm a contending team. And if I'm a rebuilding team, Swift is definitely somebody that I would be looking to move on from right now while his value is high. He came off a good season with Philly, got the big contract, but we've seen guys move on to new teams all the time and then things fall apart. Look at Miles Sanders. So I would be looking to ship him off if you are a middle-of-the-pack or rebuilding team. And if you're a contending team, don't be counting on him to be one of your top two guys all season long. One of Herbert or Johnson, I think, will probably end up stepping up to be a pretty solid player in Dynasty. But particularly, I think Roschon Johnson with the goal line work probably gets the edge for me right now, and I think that's what the market says as well. So just something to keep in mind there at the running back position. Moving on over to wide receiver. So this is where, a lot of the excitement is for the Chicago Bears because there's DJ Moore, who was a top 10 fantasy receiver last year. I believe he was wide receiver number 6. And Keenan Allen, new member of the Chicago Bears. Rome Odunze was drafted by the team this year in the first round. And then there's Tyler Scott as well. So DJ Moore comes in at wide receiver 22. Keenan Allen at wide receiver 52. Rome Odunze is at wide receiver 14. And Tyler Scott way down at 131. Now, Rome Odunze being the highest ranked wide receiver from a market value standpoint is interesting to me. I understand it. He has a top 10 capital. He's younger than DJ Moore, who is 27. So there will be a passing of the torch at some point, but 14 is still very high for someone who it might take a couple years before he truly steps in as a, one of those high-end wide receiver 1 level players. I think he certainly has that capability, and it could come as early as 2025. But I think you're probably looking at more like 2026, where he, truly becomes the clear number 1 on this team. Because for now, it's still DJ Moore. DJ Moore was, not a lot of competition last year. Darnell Mooney had a rough year. Cole Kmet was really the number 2 target in this offense. But Justin Fields, the knock on him was that he can't throw the ball. And yet DJ Moore produced an incredible fantasy season. And now he has what should be an upgrade at the position from a passing standpoint. And while there is added competition, falling in value to wide receiver 22 is a pretty significant drop. And I think I'm more than comfortable with that cost. I've added him in a few places. And I'm not worried about Keenan Allen. Comes in at age 32. No more Justin Herbert. So for him, this is going to be a QB downgrade, especially in 2024, because rookie quarterbacks in general just always struggle to, produce high-level wide receiver 1s for fantasy. It's just a rare thing. So between the age and the QB change, new team, new offense, and the fact that, Rome Odunze is there as well, I could see Keenan Allen falling to the wide receiver 3 by the end of the season here for the Bears. I really don't think that that's that far-fetched. And I expect that it will be Moore and Odunze that line up on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. I think Allen will be more in the slot. And, it'll be an interesting scenario to see play out because there's a lot of talent on the field at this position, and Keenan Allen certainly is still a very good player. But at some point, the age will catch up, and I think being in this new situation with the added competition, there was no DJ Moore or Rome Odunze level player opposite of Keenan Allen on the field in LA. Mike Williams had his moments here and there, but I don't think he's in the same conversation as these other players. So all of those things taken into consideration, I'm pretty out on Keenan Allen for this season. And if you can still get something of pretty solid value in a trade, I would be looking to move him in pretty much all circumstances in Dynasty. And Rome Odunze, again, I think, big fan. I do have him in a league or two as well, and I think that the future of there is very bright. I just think you have to be patient with him because it might not come right away. Tyler Scott, as the 4th receiver on the team, probably somebody that can be left on waivers, but if you have an extra bench spot, you have open space, throw him on there because should somebody like Keenan Allen suffer an injury, there will be some sort of value there. But again, it's somebody that isn't really going to contribute otherwise, but is one of those injury insurance type of players. At tight end, Cole Kmet, tight end 15, Gerald Everett, tight end 48, and I like Cole Kmet, right? He's been very good for fantasy the past couple years. He's been a top 10 guy, but it's been a tough offseason for Cole Kmet because, he went from being the clear number 2 option in the passing game behind DJ Moore with Justin Fields, who he had a very good connection with, but now you have a new quarterback, a new offensive coordinator in Shane Waldron. He drops to 4th, maybe even 5th in, where he would probably rank in terms of targets in the passing game. There obviously is going to be the big 3 at receiver. I think Cole Kmet probably is 4th, but DeAndre Swift will catch a lot of passes as well. And then Gerald Everett signs with the team, who was a fully capable tight end with the Chargers and has a very good connection with Shane Waldron at OC. So all of that being said, it's been a tough offseason, but I think that is reflected in his market value because he has dropped down to tight end 15, which I think is actually very fair. He's 1 spot ahead of Luke Musgrave, 1 spot behind Ben Sinnott. So I think that's a good spot because there certainly is some upside here still. Good player. We've seen it on the field. If he can develop a good connection with Caleb Williams, then, he could still improve on that tight end 15 price tag. But there is definitely some more risk there than there was last season. So I think that's just something important to keep in mind. And Gerald Everett probably can be left on waivers. Could be some upside if Kmet gets hurt. You at least have that clear, handcuff value there. But unless you're a Kmet owner or desperate for, tight end depth, probably doesn't need to be on your roster. And that is why he is ranked at tight end 48. Now, moving on over to the defending division champions, the Detroit Lions, and Jared Goff checks in at QB 17 for the Lions. And I think that Jared Goff is actually pretty underrated both in real life and in fantasy. We saw him get that huge contract from the Lions this offseason, and this is somebody that is a high-end QB2 or a low-end QB1 in Superflex leagues. And I think that is very, very valuable. If you're a contending Dynasty team and you have Jared Goff as your second starter, I think you're in a really good spot. Now, if he's your number 1 starter, hopefully you have some higher-end pieces throughout the rest of your lineup because, again, if in Superflex, if you're starting with somebody at the 1-2 turn, that puts you at a bit of a disadvantage. But QB 17, I think, makes a lot of sense for him. He's kind of the last of the safe quarterbacks from a value standpoint because he's in that same group and tier in my mind as Dak Prescott, Tua, Brock Purdy. And there are arguments there. I think that, Dak is probably rightly so valued above him. But I think Tua is a pretty similar player from a value standpoint. And all of these players, but Goff is ranked right ahead of most of the other rookies, not named Caleb Williams or Jan Daniels. He's also ranked ahead all of the older quarterbacks and kind of those, middling, been around a while type of guys, Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, etc. So, and I shouldn't say that Kirk Cousins is not necessarily a middling quarterback per se, but he is older and coming off the injury. So the point still stands that he is ranked ahead of those guys that certainly possess a little bit more risk. Whereas I think Jared Goff is very safe. He's going to be, he's an extremely rich man's version of Derek Carr, I think, in a way, because Derek Carr is somebody that, he's a safe low-end QB2 play, right? He's going to be somewhere between QB 15 and QB 20 basically every year, whereas Jared Goff is somebody that I see more in that 10 to 15 range, so just a whole tier above him. But I don't think he is in the same tier as Herbert or Love from a dynasty standpoint, but I don't think he's all that far behind as well. So there's nothing that suggests that Jared Goff cannot have, a huge touchdown type of season that puts him, in that upper tier of quarterbacks on a redraft basis. And he was QB 7 overall last year. But again, if you want to really look at it in points per game, he was 15th. So I think that makes sense. He's available. You know that you're probably going to get a good game from him when it's a game in a dome, home game, or especially against middle of the pack defenses or worse. He really, really plays well against, mediocre defenses. And you love to see that, especially when you are on a team that this year, I think Jared Goff and the Lions are going to have, I think it's like 14 of their 17 games are going to be in domes. And so that's great. You love to see that. And that's why Jared Goff, I think, represents a very good value right now at QB 17. At running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, RB3 behind Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall, one spot ahead of Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Taylor, and David Montgomery, running back 23, and then Craig Reynolds is the third running back, Sion Vaki, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but a rookie out of Utah that the team drafted on day 3. He's getting a little bit of hype, kind of a versatile guy that played safety and running back. Probably not going to have any sort of fantasy impact. He'll be somebody that matters more for real life on special teams, but just something to be aware of should there be an injury, because that's really the only time that somebody like Craig Reynolds has any value. But from a 1-2 punch standpoint, Gibbs and Montgomery, one of the best in the entire NFL, and I think Gibbs is properly valued at RB3. He's so young, he's so explosive, he can catch passes. When you're talking about a full PPR league, like all the leagues that I play in, there's just so much extra value from having somebody like Gibbs who's going to catch the ball a lot. He probably will eat into David Montgomery's workload a little bit more this season. Not enough to diminish Montgomery's value, but he should take a little bit more, which only makes him better. We really saw him kind of explode the second half of the season as they worked him in. And I expect more of the same of him being that, high-level fantasy impact player. And David Montgomery should be kind of a safe, steady guy to have. If you're looking for, somebody in the RB2 or 3 range that you can have as a flex, that you want as, your third or fourth running back on your dynasty team in your lineups, I think David Montgomery is a good value there. And even in a pinch, he could be kind of a low-end RB2 for your dynasty team. I think that David Montgomery and DeAndre Swift represent fairly similar, players to your roster, and I think we see that reflected in where they're valued, 21 versus 23. And so David Montgomery, to me, is a very good running back 3 to have on your team. And he has huge contingent upside, which is something that a player like DeAndre Swift does not have, because should something happen to Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery is probably going to get the ball 30 times a game. The Lions are going to run the ball, pound the rock, and they're not afraid to load David Montgomery up. We saw it a few times last year. So, should some sort of injury happen, huge potential upside. And same goes for Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs already is going to be extremely valuable, but should something happen to David Montgomery, I think you're going to see Gibbs, just completely take over the backfield. I think there is bell cow ability for both of these players. So that's why I like both where they currently are in terms of market value. Another player that I like where he is market value-wise is Amon-Ra St. Brown, coming in at wide receiver 4, moving over to the wide receiver group. And there is Jameson Williams, wide receiver 50, and then Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples-Jones, kind of round out the group there. And there is a bit of a lack of depth at the wide receiver position for the Detroit Lions. I love St. Brown. I think 4 makes perfect sense. I think that's, sort of the obvious consensus ranking. For me, he's in the conversation with Jamar Chase for wide receiver 3. I'd almost give the edge to St. Brown. I'd have to dive into it a little bit deeper, but they're in the same tier, and I think he belongs in the same tier as Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, in that there's a very clear top 4 group, and they're just so far separated from everybody else, and St. Brown belongs in that group. He's now tied to Jared Goff for the next 5 years, and Goff and St. Brown have a great connection. He's the clear number 1. He's healthy now, too, after what sounds like a pretty wild oblique injury that he played through all of last season. So, tough guy, great receiver, and nothing really else to say about St. Brown other than that he's going to be somebody you just plug into your lineup. He's there every week, and you will be happy almost every single game with what he produces for your fantasy team. Now, somebody who, maybe will not leave you as happy is going to be Jameson Williams. Now, I've been pretty tough on Jameson Williams since he was drafted. I was against the pick. I, didn't think it was the best allocation of resources. I didn't love him as a player, and he just hasn't put it all together between, injury or suspension or just having trouble getting on the field. It's been a rough go, but he finally started to put things together at the end of last season. He showed a lot of flashes, and he's somebody that I think is very good in a best ball format where you don't have to make the decision about when you put him in your lineup because he is very capable at scoring long touchdowns. He's going to catch some deep ball passes. He's going to get handoffs here and there, end arounds, things like that. We saw it against the 49ers in the playoffs where he had that great touchdown. But I don't see Jameson Williams as ever really being a star or somebody that you can just lock into your starting lineup and know he's going to produce. And so in that sense, I think wide receiver 50 is where his value currently is much more palatable than it has been the past couple years after he was drafted. Now, I still don't know if I love the value there. I think I would probably have him a bit lower. And to me, in that sense, I think that he represents somebody that is a trade-away candidate because the odds of somebody putting it together in year 3 after doing next to nothing for the first 2 seasons is very low. Now, the circumstances have been a little bit different because of the suspension, because of, the injury coming in from, college. So again, it's a little bit unique, but he's not going to surpass St. Brown. He's not going to surpass Laporta, and I don't think he's going to surpass Gibbs in the passing game either. So you're probably looking at the 4th option in the passing game with, kind of a streaky player. He's certainly going to have some big games because he's going to score touchdowns. But having to make that lineup decision every week is going to give you headaches. So in Dynasty, I'm probably avoiding him. I hope that he's probably going to be somebody that's a better real-life player than he is a fantasy football player because he does bring something different to the offense, but it's going to be a nightmare trying to decide when to plug him into your lineup and when to sit him, and so for that reason, I am out. Now, Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples-Jones, probably worth spots on your bench because of this lack of depth. We really need to see some of the rotation, probably the first couple games, to get a feel for who the true number 3 is. I think Khalif Raymond probably is that guy, and he's a deep threat as well, but Donovan Peoples-Jones has a little bit of potential here, and if you have, a deep bench and you have the roster spots, I think it's worth throwing one or both on to your team just to see what happens. And there is going to be some injury upside too as well, because it's a thin room, and should something happen to St. Brown or Jameson Williams, someone is going to have to step up and be, take over those roles. So that's why those guys should be added, and you'll want to do that now, not during the season, because at that point you're going to have to spend a bunch of fab, and it's going to be a tough position for you. So just go ahead, do it now if you have the roster spot. Over at tight end, Sam Laporta, the tight end 1 overall, which is exactly what he should be. He was an absolute stud last year as a rookie. He is tied with Goff now, with Goff re-signing with the team. And given kind of the lack of depth at wide receiver, Sam Laporta is the number 2 on this team. And everything is there for him to remain a top 5, top 3 wide receiver on a yearly basis over the next, 5+ seasons. So I'm all in on Sam Laporta. Was a great pick by the team. And Brock Wright is also there, who represents kind of an interesting handcuff, because the Lions matched a pretty solid offer from the 49ers to keep him. And so, again, it's one of those situations where he doesn't really represent much potential without an injury or something of the like to Sam Laporta. But if you are a Laporta manager and you want the handcuff, Brock Wright to me is the pretty clear backup to him. So could be some upside there. If you're one of those people that really likes to have their starters handcuffs and be protected should something happen, Brock Wright will be that guy. Heading on over to Green Bay, the Green Bay Packers, who just have been a QB factory over the years, and Jordan Love, QB9, who, just was a huge breakout last year, and he's right in that Caleb Williams, Justin Herbert tier, which I think is exactly where it belongs. As I mentioned earlier, I would have Love and Herbert both ahead of Caleb Williams. So in that sense, I would probably still keep him right around that QB9 mark, just have, the order might be a little bit different for me. However, it's interesting because he sat for such a long time, and I think a lot of people got very lucky with Jordan Love in a way, because he was, being valued very low. I think a lot of people were skeptical that he would ever even truly get the chance to play and whatnot. Obviously, he proved, all those people wrong, and is now set up to be, a QB1 over the next, 5+ years, because he's likely going to get a new contract before the season starts. So once that happens, I think his value will take an even bigger jump. I think that's probably when he will jump Caleb Williams on the Keep Trade Cut marketplace, because, he's going to be locked in. He'll get some sort of 5-year contract worth, 54, 55 million a year, something similar to like what Trevor Lawrence got. So that'll be a big boost for him. And we're going to have some great matchups in this division over the next few years between the Lions, Packers, Bears, and we'll see what the Vikings can do, but especially Packers, Lions. I'm a big NFC North guy. If you are listening to the show and you are not familiar already, I am in Michigan in the Metro Detroit area, so I am a Detroit Lions fan. Have been very familiar with all of these teams forever. So this is kind of my home division for today's preview. So moving on over to the running back position, Josh Jacobs signed with the team in the offseason. Running back 15, Marshawn Lloyd checks in at running back 33, and then A.J. Dillon at RB 75. Now, I'm still a Josh Jacobs believer. I think that he is being valued at a very good spot. I think running back 15 is it's a comfortable spot for me if I was looking to acquire him. I went out and I did pick him up in a league via trade earlier in the offseason, and I think he still has some upside at age 26. He's on a much better team than he was with the Raiders, and I think that there's a lot of potential there. He got a big contract. Now, the structure is interesting because there is a potential out after 2024 if he struggles, where the team could cut him and not have to suffer much of a cap hit in future years. So something to keep an eye on. But I don't expect Jacobs to struggle. I think he's going to be very good. I think he's going to be more of a bell cow type of guy. And that'll be a little bit of a switch for the Packers. So because of that, there is definitely some room for Marshawn Lloyd to have a role. What that will be remains to be seen. I'm not a huge Marshawn Lloyd guy. He comes in as an older rookie, 23 and a half years old, an okay prospect at a USC. Just a fine running back. I don't think he's all that special, but I don't think he's bad by any means. I'm just not that excited to have him on a roster. He's really more of a 2025 play if you think that Jacobs will struggle, because if Jacobs doesn't struggle this season, it's still going to be him again in 2025, and that makes Lloyd a 2026 guy. And, then at that point, it's like, Packers might just end up replacing him anyways in 2 years. So it's a whole another can of worms should something like that happen. So that's why I'm not really into Marshawn Lloyd. A.J. Dillon, he'll get the ball a little bit here and there, but I think everyone is out on A.J. Dillon. He's one of those players that is probably too good to drop, or at least seems too good to drop because of his name, but probably is going to be useless for fantasy. So if you're loaded at running back and whatnot, you need to make a roster move, you can go ahead and cut A.J. Dillon. I've had him on a number of teams. I think I still have him on a few, but I've also cut him on a couple as well. So just depends on how your roster is, whether you need those spots. But A.J. Dillon, his best days are probably behind him. At wide receiver, it's an extremely crowded room. I mean, there's a lot of conversation with the Packers wide receivers, and my favorite guy out of this group is Christian Watson. Now, Jaden Reed is ranked the highest from a market value standpoint. Jaden Reed's at wide receiver 31, Christian Watson at wide receiver 38, Romeo Doubs at 51, Dontavian Wicks at 54, and then Bo Melton at 104. And it's 1 through 5. That's a pretty strong wide receiver roster. So, but to me, Christian Watson will be Green Bay's number one wide receiver. The only real concern I have with him is injury, which has obviously been a huge concern for him. But there seems to be some positive momentum from, figuring out the issues with his hamstrings. And I think it was like one of them was 20% stronger than the other or something like that. So hopefully he's worked on those issues and can come back healthy, be healthy for an entire season, because he is a deep threat. He's a red zone threat. He's been the number one receiver for this team when everyone is healthy. So he is the guy. And I think that at wide receiver 38, he represents a pretty solid value. I think you can get him for a second round pick. And I would make that deal on a lot of my teams. Christian Watson, just a lot of potential. Jordan Love coming into his own as a second year starter. So a lot to like. And that's not to say that there's not things to like about the other players on this roster as well. I mean, Jaden Reed had a very good rookie season, but I do think he's being overvalued a little bit. He's a slot receiver, essentially. He's not on the field in 3 wide receiver sets. I think I heard on another show, probably the Fantasy Footballers, that he's run 2 routes in 2 wide receiver sets last year. So hopefully I'm giving proper credit there for that stat. But he's somebody that is probably not going to be on the field again in 2 wide receiver sets. It's going to be Watson. It's going to be likely Romeo Doubs with maybe Dontavian Wicks. There'll be a battle there, I think, between Doubs and Wicks. Wicks might be more talented, but I do have a little bit of a hard time believing that Doubs is just going to fall off a cliff. So in that sense, there's probably some pretty good value there with Romeo Doubs, even if he's not as exciting and hot of a name as Dontavian Wicks is. But Jaden Reed, very good player. You just got to hope that Green Bay runs 11 personnel pretty much all the time. He's going to get some handoffs. He has speed. So, but Christian Watson to me is somebody more that represents kind of a true wide receiver 1, build. He's going to, be more of a downfield threat than somebody like Jaden Reed. So that's kind of my take there. Watson's been somebody that I've been looking to acquire. I have him in a lot of best ball teams, and I like the room as a whole. There's really nobody that I dislike, for fantasy. I think they're all going to be good. They're all going to have some solid options. All are good in best ball. Dynasty could be a bit of a headache, trying to decide who you're going to start every week, but you're probably going to be plugging Watson and Reed into your starting lineups, generally speaking, unless you're loaded up as a contender and Watson is somebody that you can bring off the bench, or Reed, same thing. But now is probably the best time to go out and try to make an offer for Watson, because as soon as he has a good game or two, or we see on the field that Watson is the guy, it's going to be much more difficult to acquire him knowing that he's tied to Jordan Love for the foreseeable future. Over at tight end, it's also an interesting room with, a lot of competition. Luke Musgrave, tight end 16, Tucker Kraft at tight end 22. And I've been a big Tucker Kraft fan throughout the offseason. I said in one of my earlier shows that I thought he would take over as a starter in the fall. However, since then, he injured himself. I believe it was a pectoral injury, and he's out at least until the preseason. Probably is going to miss a lot of time in August. There's a chance even that he's not ready for the regular season, which would certainly be a huge bummer. And when you miss, training camp, all of it, a huge portion of it, or you start the year banged up, having a good, productive fantasy season becomes much less likely. And so generally speaking, I tend to shy away from players that suffered big offseason injuries or missed time leading up to the season, especially if it's like a soft tissue type of injury, like a hamstring, things like that. So in that sense, it's a little bit different, and hopefully he'll be able to come back, be healthy, ready to go. But and while I still very much like Tucker Kraft, I do think that the takeover will happen at some point. It just might not be week 1 like I had expected. It might take some time later in the season. So Luke Musgrave still will probably begin the season as a starter given that injury. But I think that it's a much, tight end 16 could be a little bit high for me on Musgrave, but it's tough. I like both. I would want to have both on a team. That way you can kind of guarantee yourself whichever one emerges. But I do think that over the long haul, if Tucker Kraft is healthy by the regular season, I do think that he eventually will take over the starting job. But the injury really sucks. It's just one of those things that, you hate to see, you can't do anything about. But that opens the door for Musgrave to, be a productive fantasy tight end as well. So if he's on your roster, that will be good news for you. And, good news for Jordan Love to have, 2 good tight ends to be able to work with this year. Now, the Minnesota Vikings, who, I think everyone probably recognizes, they're probably going to struggle a bit this year. I kind of alluded to that a few minutes ago, where the, division battle probably not going to involve Minnesota this year. And there's a lot of different issues going on with this team. But first, let's talk about the quarterback position. J.J. McCarthy drafted in the first round. He's ranked as the QB 19 on Keep Trade Cut. Sam Darnold checking in at QB 36. I'm a big J.J. McCarthy fan. I think that he will be a very good NFL quarterback. But I do think that he's probably going to sit at least a few weeks behind Sam Darnold. Darnold, I think the best way to handle this a lot of times is to have, your veterans start until the bye week, and then you make the switch at the bye week. So we could see something like that again where, Darnold basically starts for the first month or so, month and a half, something like that. And then McCarthy eventually takes over midway through the season, which I think is probably the best for McCarthy's development. We see it all the time where guys that sit for a little bit before taking over, that's very beneficial for them. We saw with Mahomes, we saw with Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers. You can go down the list. There's a lot of different names where that has been helpful. So I think we'll see that again. I think that's what Minnesota plans to do. And I think that especially will be a good thing if Minnesota is missing both TJ Hawkinson and some breaking news right before the show. Jordan Addison was arrested for DUI, so there will likely be a suspension coming for him. So if both Addison and Hawkinson are missing the first few weeks of the season, I think you would much rather have Darnold out there so you don't, just have your rookie out on the field with nobody except for Justin Jefferson to kind of do everything themselves. So that's probably how I would handle it. But I'm very high on McCarthy. I think he's going to be very good. He does have some rushing upside and should come into his own to be a very good NFL quarterback, just like he did in college. Now, Aaron Jones at running back, new member of the team coming over from the rival Green Bay Packers. So a bit of an interesting scenario there. He checks in at RB36, even though he is 29 years old. Ty Chandler, running back 57. Dwayne McBride. There's some rumblings that, Cam Akers could be back with the team. So we'll see what they do with that RB3 spot. It's kind of a mess outside of Jones and Chandler. And I would expect those two to handle pretty much all the work. But to me, Aaron Jones is the clear guy that you want to own. He's, obviously a great receiving back, and he's being valued behind both Zach Moss and Jalen Wright, which I disagree with. I think, Zach Moss and Jalen Wright, Wright certainly has some potential as a rookie, but Moss is older, and he's going to be a committee himself with Chase Brown, who's ranked one spot behind Aaron Jones. I would much rather have Aaron Jones than either of those guys, and I would rather have him over Jalen Wright. So I think that there is some value to be had here with Aaron Jones, and he might only have 1 year left of being a high-level fantasy player, but he could have 2. You never know. And so for those reasons, I'm perfectly happy with having Aaron Jones, as my third running back on a team, because he's going to be good. The only reason he's valued so low is because of his age. So if you're a contender, I think this is a great target. Go out, add him to your roster. There's nobody else here to get the ball. I mean, Ty Chandler certainly will be involved, has some explosive ability, and it's not going to be, some, 90% workload for Aaron Jones. Chandler is also a good back to own. But outside of that, I don't see anyone else contributing on the offense at the position. So Aaron Jones, I do have him as a buy if you're a contender. And, we'll keep an eye on how that RB3 battle plays out over training camp, because whether or not you add, whoever it is, McBride, Akers, etc., to your roster, should an injury happen, you'll want to be aware of who that is so you can, snap that player up off of waivers rather quickly. So just have that in the back of your mind throughout the preseason. And, something else that you also will need to do the same thing as you watch these preseason games, figure out who the heck is going to be the wide receiver 3 and 4 for this team, because Justin Jefferson, the clear wide receiver 1, both on this team and overall in fantasy. And it's interesting because I do think that CeeDee Lamb could present a bit of a challenge to that wide receiver 1 position. I ran a poll on Twitter actually this past week where I believe it was 59% to 41% in favor of Justin Jefferson as the overall number 1 wide receiver in Dynasty. So there is a conversation there. The market still likes Jefferson a tad more, and I think that's where I am, but part of it depends, too, on the contract situation with CeeDee Lamb. If he gets paid, if Dak Prescott gets paid, and those two are tied together for the next 5 years, I think that probably is a better situation to have than Justin Jefferson, who, while he did get paid, and I do like J.J. McCarthy, you have to acknowledge, even if you like McCarthy, that there is some risk. He is a rookie. There's certainly the possibility that he busts or just isn't as prolific of a passer as Dak Prescott. And Justin Jefferson has had, some injury issues of his own recently last year as well. So it's not perfect, but he's still, the best wide receiver in the league, I think, to most people. And he should just rack up the stats, especially given the situation with Jordan Addison, with the DUI, like we just mentioned, just complete bonehead move. There's no excuse for that. And he's probably going to get hit with some suspension somewhere between 2 and 6 games. I think 3 games is what we've seen before for things like this, DUIs. So if he misses 3 games, that's going to be a rough go. And there's going to have to be somebody else that catches passes. And I really don't know who it's going to be because there's Brandon Powell, Jalen Naylor, Trent Sherfield, somebody named Tristan Jackson. I mean, we're talking about guys that, just don't see the field. Nobody knows. But Brandon Powell's been around a little bit. He's bounced around the league. He's more of a slot guy. So I would expect him to, be on the field a bit here and there. I think Jalen Naylor is probably the other guy that I would be looking to stash out of Michigan State. And because there is some potential. They did draft him a couple years ago, and, given this receiver room and the various issues, somebody's going to have to be on the field. They're going to miss KJ Osborne, who they let move on to New England. There would have been a nice opportunity for him, but he is no longer there, so somebody else is going to have to do it. Now, Jordan Addison, DUI aside, he's been a pretty popular sell candidate, I think, in the Dynasty community this offseason because people are so worried about the touchdown regression, which I think is fair. He will likely have fewer touchdowns in 2024, but depending on the suspension, he's going to be tied to J.J. McCarthy. There's nobody else outside of him and Justin Jefferson at the wide receiver position on this team that is, really worth talking about for fantasy and for Dynasty. So he's going to get a lot of targets when he's on the field. I'm holding. I'm not looking to sell. His value is going to dip in the coming days after this news. So, he's wide receiver 26 right now, but that might not be the case down the line. So we'll see kind of how his value changes. I don't think that a 3-game suspension should really alter it all that much. So it might just drop a spot or two, but who knows? If it falls considerably, it could present a buy low opportunity because people are already moving on from him. So this could, open up the opportunity for you to go make an offer, try to get him for a 2nd-round pick. So, I would not sell him for a 2nd-round pick, especially considering he was just taken, at the 107, 108 by most people a year ago. So probably not happening, but you never know. People kind of react differently to this sort of news. So could be worth sniffing around at this point. Now, over at tight end, we mentioned a few minutes ago that not only could Jordan Addison miss time, but TJ Hawkinson will likely miss time. So he comes in at tight end 7, and he's coming off, an ACL, MCL injury, and that happened right near the very end of the season. And he's probably going to miss at least a month of the 2024 season, which I don't know that enough people have, been talking about that fact. He's not somebody that you're going to be able to count on for your team and your lineups. Typically, the recovery period for the surgery is about 9 months, which he had at the very end of January. So you're probably looking, best case scenario, a, beginning of October type of return, which, could be a bit aggressive too. And then expecting him to just bounce right back, be ready to go, back to his old self, I think could be tough. So we could see a bit of a rough year for TJ Hawkinson, at least at the beginning while he gets, reacclimated to the game. So that leaves a whole host of other guys to potentially fill in for the first month or two of the season. Johnny Munt, Josh Oliver, Robert Tonyan, and then N'Keal Harry was moved from wide receiver to tight end. Pretty interesting move there. He was, first-round pick by the Patriots, popular early pick in rookie drafts, massive bust. So, we'll see how that works out. But to me, Munt and Oliver are really the two guys that are likely going to replace Hawkinson, just like they did at the end of last season. And I actually prefer Johnny Munt because he's the one that actually kind of filled Hawkinson's role after the injury occurred. He saw higher snap shares, percentage-wise than Josh Oliver did. So Munt, to me, could be somebody that not only fills that role, but also presents some, sneaky fantasy value because if there's no Addison and it is just Justin Jefferson, or even regardless of the scenario, even if Addison doesn't miss any time, worst case scenario, he's probably, the third option in the passing attack, maybe fourth, depending on Aaron Jones, but there's going to be some value there. They're going to be playing from behind a lot. So Johnny Munt, somebody that you should add to your team if you need some tight end depth for the first couple months of the season. And, doesn't hurt to tack on Oliver as well, but Munt to me is the one that I would much rather have. All right, so we've made it now to the end of the show. We have our biggest buy, our biggest sell, biggest sleeper, and our big breakout for the NFC North division and our division predictions overall. And we'll start with our biggest buy, which at current market value on Keep Trade Cut, I'm going to go with Jared Goff at QB 17. I think, as we discussed with him, just a very safe player, and a QB 17 price, that's not a huge price point. I think he's somebody that you can definitely acquire, and it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. So Jared Goff, if you're in need of a QB2, that's who I'd be going out and targeting, especially this year given all the games in a dome. Now, the biggest sell at current value, I'm going to stick with the same team for at least one of these two players. That's Jameson Williams at wide receiver 50, and then we'll move over to the Bears with Keenan Allen at wide receiver 52. I just am out on both players for this season, and we talked about both at length earlier on in this episode. I just don't see the path for either one, really being a true dynasty difference maker. Keenan Allen has been an awesome player over the years, but I think that this is probably the year where things kind of hit a wall with him. And then Jameson Williams, just good but not great, and I just don't see the upside that I think some people did when he was drafted. So if I could swap those guys out for some different players in a similar range, I would do that. And interestingly enough, this could be a swap that would make a lot of sense for, if you're a rebuilding team and you have Keenan Allen and you're a contender and you have Jameson Williams, could make some sense to flip those two. Keenan Allen probably projects to have a better season in 2024. So there's an idea there. They're ranked about the same. So something to consider, but I'm out on both, and I really don't have either one. I don't think I have either one on any dynasty teams. Even though I was a huge Keenan Allen guy last year, and he helped me win a few different leagues, but not this year. I'm out on both Williams and Keenan Allen. For my biggest sleeper, also got two names to mention. So one, if you're just talking really deep sleeper, you need the depth. Not going to be somebody that necessarily has long-standing dynasty value, but so maybe this is a little bit more of a redraft take. But Johnny Munt, who we just talked about a minute ago, I think he's going to fill in and be the starting tight end for the Vikings for the first month and a half, and potentially more. We'll see how that recovery goes for TJ Hawkinson. And then Roschon Johnson for the Chicago Bears. So RB51, I've talked about my concerns with DeAndre Swift and the fact that Roschon Johnson, I think, could have that goal line role. So I think that's going to give him some value. I think that could turn into a bit more of a 50-50 type of committee. Or 60-40, something along those lines. I don't think it's going to be just, DeAndre Swift and nobody else. But so Roschon Johnson, sleeper for the NFC North. And then last but not least, my biggest breakout for the division, you probably guessed it, and it's Christian Watson, wide receiver 38. I think the breakout is finally coming for him. Fingers crossed that he stays healthy, takes care of those hamstrings. But I see I think he's going to lead this team in receiving, and I think he's going to be ranked much higher this time next year in the Dynasty rankings. And now with our division standing predictions, I think it's going to be a highly competitive division. I think we'll probably, we'll see at least two playoff teams. And at number one, I'm going to go with the Detroit Lions. I do think they repeat. I just think they're the best team all around. They have a great offense. As we saw last year, Jahmyr Gibbs, Dave Montgomery, St. Brown, Jared Goff gets the extension, Penei Sewell. So a lot to love there, but they did add a lot on defense as well. They really attacked, some of their weaknesses on defense, especially at corner. They added DJ Reader at defensive tackle. So, they have the best offensive line in football. They have an improved defense, great playmakers. I think they repeat and are a true threat to have the 1 seed in the NFC. I'll go with Green Bay at number 2. I think they'll make the playoffs, be another wildcard team. And Chicago, I think, will finish in 3rd. I think they'll actually push for a wildcard spot. I think that they'll be in the mix. I don't think they'll make the playoffs this year, but should be, much improved. I think they'll be right in the mix, probably around 500, and be in the conversation for the 7th seed near the end of the season. But Just don't think it's going to happen this time. I think they got to wait another year. And then Minnesota will round it out in fourth. I think they're probably in for a disappointing year. But the future is bright there with the rookie quarterback and, a couple young, obviously the star in Justin Jefferson and then Jordan Addison, still a young player. So there are some things to like there if you're a Vikings fan. I just don't know that 2024 is going to be your year. So with that, that's everything on the NFC North. So thank you all for tuning in. This was our first NFC divisional preview. Next week, we will move on to our next division from the NFC and keep those coming. And then it's almost August. It's almost time for preseason football training camp. So we're going to have a lot more. When we finish these division previews, we have a bunch of interesting episodes coming. We may even test out going 2 episodes a week for a few weeks in August as everyone gets ready for their for the season and for the redraft leagues and all those things. So stay tuned for a lot of great content coming your way. And if you've made it this far, thank you so much. And we will see you all next week.